Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. Or in our case, a 3-week vacation with my grandparents. My grandparents had invited my brother and sister and me on a 3-week adventure to explore the great American West. And we were excited to go because they said that we would get to see Old Faithful, and we would see the Rocky Mountains and Yellowstone National Park, and we were going to see buffalo, and we would see moose, and we would actually, absolutely, no doubt, see bears. I had always wanted to see a bear. I mean, I grew up in Michigan, and in the Lower Peninsula, there are no bears, or at least there weren't then. Now, I don't know what inspired my grandparents to take their 3 oldest grandchildren on vacation with them. It could have been that they just ran out of kids. Or, it could have been that they wanted to leave an indelible impression on us. I like to think of it as the great grandchild experiment. That they would take us on vacation, and if the vacation went well, they would take the rest of the grandchildren on some adventure. My grandfather was he was a very special guy in my life. We were 2 kindred spirits, a lot alike. He was big man on campus. And I mean that truly. He worked at Michigan State University, and if you would walk with him across campus, everywhere you went, people would come up to him and say hello and know who he was. He did a lot of jobs there. He ran the campus laundry, when they used to wash all the sheets for 20,000 students on campus. He ran the concessions at the football stadium. But by far his favorite job was to run the food stores at Michigan State. A huge building full of food to feed 20,000 kids a day. It was a job that he took very seriously, and he would often go back to the food stores after hours at night to make sure people had cleaned up, to make sure that they had done a good job. So he would do that after hours and on weekends. Every once in a while, he would take my brother Bob and me with him. And he would take us in, and we would get to inspect the warehouse. And then he would go up to these huge doors, and he would push the button, and they would slide open. And he would lead us into this gigantic cooler with sides of beef hanging all over. And he would lure us all the way to the back of the cooler. And then he would say hi, and then he would turn around, he would run out, he would push the button to close the doors, and he would turn out the lights. You think that's funny? And then he would get on the intercom and he would go, moo. I don't have many nightmares, but when I do, there are cattle. My grandfather was always upbeat. His glass was always half full. He was a very generous man. I can remember he helped our family through the great barber recession of the 1970s. Now, this probably didn't affect most of you, but my dad was a barber. And when all you hippies out there decided to grow your hair down to here, and you know, these briskets were so cheap, I just couldn't help myself, so I bought 5 of them, and I don't know how your grandmother and I are going to eat these. And he would drop 2 of them on the counter, and he would go off. He loved to play poker, and every Tuesday night there was a poker game with his poker buddies. It was said that if my grandmother died on a Tuesday, no one would find out until Wednesday. Because nothing interrupted the poker game. He smoked cigars, drank whiskey, and drove Cadillacs. Yeah. He was a trained butcher. And at 5,000 pounds, that Cadillac was actually a really good value. He loved that Cadillac. I will never forget when they pulled up into our driveway that morning before dawn to pick us up. The floodlights from our house shone down on the Cadillac. It shined and glimmered. But there was something a little strange. On top of the Cadillac, there was this flying saucer-shaped, what we would know today as a car carrier, but there weren't car carriers then. So it was a flying saucer-shaped car carrier. And my grandfather said, well, that was designed by one of his poker buddies, and it was so that we could bring back a few extra souvenirs. Well, that was great, thought my grandmother. Gave us a little extra room in the trunk, and she threw some of our suitcases up there, and then we loaded in the car. My sister Chris and I got in the back seat, and my grandparents and my brother Bob, who was prone to car sickness and just a little bit spoiled, got to sit in the front seat and learn how to read a map with my grandmother. Maybe one of you GM people can explain this to me, because I know there's a few people in the audience, but whoever designed the Cadillacs back then thought it must have been really cool for the people in the back seat not to be able to see out the front window. Because they designed them, and the back seats were so high that unless you were sitting on 4 pillows or 3 suitcases, you were not going to see out the front window. But the good news was you couldn't see out the front window, but the people in the front seat couldn't see what you were doing in the back seat. And it was on that trip that my sister and I became fast friends. You know, we spent hours. She convinced me that if I practiced enough, I could touch my tongue to my nose. And let me assure you, after 3 hours, you just get nothing but a sore tongue. We played games of alphabet on the street signs and with license plates. I would wait until she had a mouthful of milk, and I would try to make her giggle to see if I could get her to spit it out her nose. And then somewhere in Iowa, you know, it's a long way from Lansing, Michigan to Denver, Colorado, where the Rocky Mountains start. And somewhere in Iowa, we decided to start making the peace sign to everybody that went by. And then my grandmother commented, my, the people in Iowa, they're friendly. As everybody went by and made the peace sign back. We giggled a lot on that trip, and then somewhere, I think in Nebraska, we had stopped for a lunch. Every day we ate lunch out, and some of you will appreciate this. We would have white bread sandwiches with potted meat. You remember potted meat? We would have potted meat. It's nasty. This stuff is nasty. They probably still sell it, but don't buy it. We would have white bread sandwiches with potted meat, and we were all sitting there, especially my sister and me. We were sitting there, and we were looking at the Cadillac with that flying saucer-shaped thing on the roof. And we said, you know, with those fins on the Cadillac, that thing looks just like the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek. And well, we thought, well, if we are riding in the Enterprise, then we must be the crew of the Enterprise. And so we decided that Grandpa, he was brave and strong. He must be Captain Kirk. And then there was Grandma, who was about 4'10". But she was very logical. She was Mr. Spock. She would set Kirk straight every time she could. My sister, she decided that her side of the back seat was the sick bay and that she was going to be Dr. McCoy, or Bones. Me, I was Scotty. More power, Captain, more power. I was in the back seat. My side of the back seat was the engine room. So we spent the whole day flying through Nebraska and Colorado. We finally came to Denver, and the Rocky Mountains loomed over the city. Wow. For the first time you see that, it's an inspiring sight. We spent the night there, and then the next day, we got up and we went to Golden, Colorado, a short distance off, because Kirk had always wanted to go on the Coors Rocky Mountain Brewery Tour. And why not? What a great experience for your grandkids. There's a little hitch here. See, Kirk was harboring a secret that he hadn't told anyone. And just as God had commanded Moses to build the ark 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, the car carrier flying saucer had been designed to be 3 cases wide, 4 cases long, and 2 cases high. It was the perfect size to transport 24 cases of Coors beer across state lines. Now, for some of you young people might not know this, but all of us older people do. In the 70s, you could not get Coors beer in Michigan. And since you could not get Coors beer in Michigan, we all wanted Coors beer. Right? It was the greatest beer ever. Rocky Mountain flavor. John Denver came in every... Spock was a little incensed. It will not work. It will not fit. It will crush the car. It will scratch the car. Nonsense, said Kirk. It was designed by a General Motors engineer. Specifically to carry 24 cases. It's the perfect size. And that explained those little vent holes now to keep the beer cool that look like the windows on the Enterprise. So we loaded all the beer up into the flying saucer, and all that luggage came down and went into the back seat. Which was good because now we could see out the front. And nobody wore seatbelts, so what? Who cares? And so we drove to Colorado Springs, Park City, Zion National Park, Bryce Canyon. And then we went up, somehow made it to Dinosaur National Park. Unbelievable sights and things to see with your grandparents. And then we went down into Salt Lake City to see some of Spock's relatives. And we stayed with them for a week. We saw the Great Salt Lake and the copper mine. The thing is, when you spend 3 weeks with somebody, sometimes you find out things that you really hadn't ought to know. And what we learned was that Kirk was addicted to kaopectate, which explained the 2 almost gallon-sized jugs that were in the storage compartment of the Enterprise. Spock, on the other hand, was an X-Lax user. It was the yin and the yang. It was a nice balance. The other thing we found out about Kirk was he had this insatiable need to be right. He always had to be right. Mostly Spock and Kirk fought about directions and which way they should go over the mountain. But I'll give you an example. One day Kirk pulled the Enterprise into a Red Lobster and we went in and had dinner. We came out of the Red Lobster, got back in the spaceship, started it up, put his hands on the wheel, put his foot to the floor, boom, over the parking barrier. Who put that parking barrier there? Spock said, well, it's logical. It was there all the time. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. No, it wasn't. There's no way that parking barrier was not there when we got here. I leaned over to Bones and I said, it must have been those damn Klingons. We went off from there and we went to Yellowstone Park where we saw Old Faithful and we saw the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. We saw the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone and we saw moose and buffalo, but we didn't see any bears. That was the year. They had to figure it was my year that I get to go to Yellowstone. That was the year that they had relocated all of the bears from around the campgrounds back to their natural habitat. So we saw no bears, but we had a great time. And then we were doing one last thing before heading back to Michigan. And that was, Kirk always said, you know, you can't really appreciate a mountain unless you hike it or climb it. And so he said, on the way back, we should stop in the Grand Tetons and we should do some hiking. So we took the Enterprise, fully loaded with beer, towels, kaopectate, luggage, souvenirs, passengers, and we drove it up the mountain, higher and higher and higher. And then, right before we got to the parking area, Captain, there's been a disturbance in the storage compartment. I said, and when we pulled into that desolate parking lot, gravel parking lot, Kirk opened the trunk, and apparently he hadn't taken science very seriously, him or Spock, and they didn't know that the volume of some liquids changes as it goes to higher altitude. And the 2 huge containers of kaopectate exploded all over the trunk. Spock and Kirk dragged the Klingon out of the front seat, and together they cleaned up with all the towels we had. Bones and I sat in the back seat, giggling and laughing. You can ask the Klingon, this is absolutely true. And then when they were done, Spock said, put those towels on top of that beer and lock them in. We are not throwing those towels away. In the 70s, you threw nothing away. And he left the trunk cracked, and we went off through the mountains, and Kirk was right. You cannot appreciate a mountain until you climb it and see those vistas and hike. And we had a blast. We hiked for 2 hours, and then we got back to the Enterprise, and we got in. Kirk turned over. Come! The Dilithium crystals are dead! I said, and then Spock got out, and the trunk was cracked open. And Spock said, this is logical, Kirk. You left the trunk open, the light was on in the trunk, and the battery's dead. So there we were on the top of a mountain, desolate, 5:30 in the afternoon, sun, maybe in an hour or so was going to set, all by ourselves. Spock said we should just wait for somebody. I'm sure a ranger will come up. Kirk thought about it, and he thought about it, and he thought about it. And then Kirk came up with a perfectly brilliant, spectacular, stupid idea. He remembered that there was an intergalactic service station at the bottom of the mountain. And that if we could just get the Enterprise rolling, we could coast that thing down the mountain. So Kirk got behind the driver's wheel and he shifted it into neutral. And we all got out and pushed. There was Spock at 110 pounds, me at 120 pounds, my sister at 115 pounds, my brother at 140 pounds. Push, said Kirk, push, said Kirk. Bones said, damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a pusher. Well, that wasn't working, so then Kirk got out and he put Spock behind the wheel. 110 pounds, driving a 6,500-pound vehicle. Well, with the 5,000-pound vehicle and 400 pounds of beer on top of it, 1,100 pounds of other things, and push, he said, push, and then the wheels started to turn. Slowly it crackled across that gravel, and it started to move. Push, push. We pushed a little harder, and then it started to inch out of the parking lot and onto the mountain road, and then it started to go a little faster and a little faster, and it was like, get in! And there was no time to replace Spock in the driver's seat, so Kirk got in the middle, pushed the Klingon against the door, and Bones and I got in the back, sat on top of our suitcases so we could watch. Now at first, this was great. Slowly they eased down the mountain. It took both of them to turn the wheel. That was a big thing. But then they remembered the hoop-de-doo. And what I call a hoop-de-doo is that spot in the mountain where you have to go back up before you go down. And they thought, okay, we've got to get going faster so we can get over the hoop-de-doo. And so Kirk said, take your foot off the brake and let it go. And Spock took her foot off the brake. We started going faster and faster and faster and faster, and then you could see the pine trees. There were mountain goats on the side of the road. They'd never seen anything like it. Cotton, we've reached warp speed. We were going 90 miles an hour. Apparently Kirk and Spock didn't take physics either. Because they greatly over-anticipated the amount of speed they would need to get over the hoop-de-doo. And there we go. Faster and faster and faster. And we hit it. The Enterprise was airborne! when there they were. That whole family of bears right in the middle of the road. Spock! Foot on the brake. Kirk put his foot on top of hers. And when we came to a stop, just before the bears, the flying saucer spun around. The other strap broke. The bears looked. And then it hit a large pole pine tree, a huge one, and there was this intergalactic explosion of Coors beer and kaopectate, the lights those bears had never seen. Animals came from everywhere out of the woods to see what was going on. Apparently bears like kaopectate mixed with their Coors beer, because there was gonna be a party. We got out of the car and we hugged each other. And then we just started to laugh. Thankful to be alive and stopped. When I turned around, the Enterprise had turned back into just a Cadillac. Kirk and Spock had turned back into my grandparents. The Klingon and Bones had turned back into my siblings. Those were the voyages of the Cadillac Enterprise. Okay, I'm not finished. Those were the voyages of the Starship, those were the voyages of the Cadillac Enterprise. Its 3-week mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilization, to boldly go where no grandchild had been before, to leave an indelible memory with your grandchildren that they will never forget. And all I can say is Spock and Kirk, mission accomplished.